please help me in giving a warm welcome to Scott Haywood.
Well, thank you very much for this warm introduction, and I do apologize. Actually, I'm a San Jose State Spartan, but I hope you'll accept me here tonight anyway. So, but go Spartans, but go Broncos, of course. So I really want to welcome everybody here, and thank everyone for the opportunity, especially the Santa Clara University and the Associated Students' Governments for helping arrange tonight's activities, and for Microsoft for helping us to produce it. Specifically, we'd like to thank Neil Datar, along with ASG, as well as Millie Kennedy, Laura Seha, and Chris Shea with SCU, and for Kenny Spade with Microsoft, who's doing all the behind-the-scenes work, so we really appreciate it. As Neil mentioned, you'll hear from him a little bit later after I finish talking about the Envision program. Should mention we have two audiences tonight, those of us who are in the room here, but we're also live streaming this as well, and we want to welcome both. For those of you who might be watching at home on YouTube, or wherever you may be, you can tweet us or send us a question if you have any. If you're tweeting, use @VTA to send your questions, and to follow the conversation at #EnvisionSV. I'm going to go ahead and give a brief presentation on what we're doing with the Envision program, and if you do have questions afterward, there's a microphone right over here. Please coming up. But I'm also here with several other VTA folks, Michelle Gouldsberry and John Sagamini over there, and some of the things we might be talking about, you might have specific questions later, so after the presentation and after Neil is done as well, please feel free to come up and talk to us, and if you have questions about the maps that you'll see over there as well. So, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and get going with the presentation. And I always cringe whenever anybody does introduction of me, and you hear that I worked at Apple. And thank goodness I left that company before it started making a whole lot of money. So no, I didn't keep any of my stock options. No, I did go to government, but I really enjoy it and haven't looked back since. So with that, I'm going to talk about Envision, and what it is essentially is back in 2014, the Valley Transportation Authority, with one of our partners, the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, looked at the possibility of placing a sales tax measure on the 2016 ballot. And what we found in 2014 was there was so much interest in looking at transportation solutions that we actually thought about going in November 2014. Generally for something like this, you want to go with a presidential election, not with just a gubernatorial election. So we looked at kind of hastily putting something together. And at the end of the day, we decided not to put something together, but give it some more time and wait and go in 2016. And so when we had that time, we kind of said, well, let's take a step back and really give ourselves a little more time to work with the community to determine if we want to go forward with the sales tax measure, what we want to do with it, and what it might look like. So we did a number of things to increase provide opportunities for people to participate in the program. And one thing we did is we created a stakeholder group. We do have several members of our stakeholder group in here today as well. We want to thank them for their work. But they've worked with us throughout the last 18 months and helped us walk through what the goals for the program might look like, what criteria, and also what types of projects we might have. We also used our existing advisory committees, and these are committees that the Valley Transportation Authority already has existing, and they range from things like Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee, our our Policy Advisory Committee, which are made up of elected officials in the area. We also have the Technical Advisory Committee, which is members of the city government, so they're able to participate, folks like public works directors, et cetera. And we also have our Committee for Transit Accessibility, which helps us on issues for the disabled community and seniors and low income as well. So we worked very closely with them. We also created an ad hoc committee of our board of directors. So our board of directors is made up of city representatives and county representatives from the 15 cities and county of Santa Clara. And one of them is in the room, as we heard. Vice Mayor Teresa O'Neill is here, and Vice Mayor O'Neill serves on our board of directors. So we created an ad hoc committee of that group to help us go through the last 18 months as well, again, to help guide staff. We also had a number of public outreach opportunities. We had meetings like this in the fall where we reached out to folks. We also have gone to many different community organizations and gotten their input as well. We also created an online budget tool too, where folks could go in and say if they did have a half-cent sales tax, what they'd like to spend money on. That was an interactive conversation we were able to have with folks. And one thing I heard frequently is, wow, $6 billion sure goes fast. And it really did for a lot of folks. But it helped folks kind of make the trade-offs where they'd like to spend their money. And then we worked also with our cities, our local governments, and worked very closely with them as well. And then finally, while we were doing this, the Silicon Valley Leadership Group, which is a business organization, conducted polling to determine whether or not there would be interest in the voting public. One thing about all this is you'll hear there's a lot of thought was put into what should go on a potential ballot. And we say we hopefully got it right here, or getting close to getting it right. But the good news is that the voters get to decide at the end of the day if we did or not. So I'm going to walk through real quickly some of the actions that we've done to get to this point, the goals for the program, the evaluation criteria we came up with, the call for projects we did with all the cities, our staff analysis, and then bring it up to the April 22nd board workshop. So what we did, first off, is when people said, well, look, if you're going to raise taxes, what is it you really hope to accomplish? And so one of the first things we did is we worked with the stakeholders and other groups, and we came up with goals for the program. So you'd say, if we did this sales tax, what is it we'd really want to accomplish? So we had a very lengthy process where we worked with our communities to determine what types of goals they'd like to see. And they were ultimately adopted by our board of directors in June. And here they are, and you'll hear us kind of talk about these more a little bit later. But the first one is to enhance safety, provide congestion relief and improve transportation efficiency, expand transportation choices and improve travel time, expand transit ridership and continue to promote quality transit for everyone. We've actively promote healthy communities, environmental sustainability, and plan for the next generation. That was, a lot of folks said we really need to have a long-term vision of this, not the short term. Improve system financial sustainability, and then continue to support the Valley's economic growth. So we said, okay, these are the goals we want to begin working with. So the next step we said is, okay, once we start to look at different transportation projects, how will we know whether or not these are meeting the goals or can help contribute to the goals? So what we did is we developed evaluation criteria to say, as we look at projects or programs, let's compare them to this criteria to see how well they meet the goals. And these were ultimately adopted. There's actually 32 different criteria. We were hoping for about 10. We got 32. And they were adopted by the board in August of 2015. We then conducted a call for projects where the public, but mostly cities, Caltrans, any organization could let us know what types of projects they would like to see us consider building over the next 30 years to possibly be funded with a sales tax or other funding sources as well. And we received over 600 projects, which come to almost $49 billion. Unfortunately, we don't have that quite a kind of budget, so it definitely it showed us that the need was definitely there, and what we really needed to focus on was see what we could do to help build these projects. So then after that, what we did is we compared the projects and looked at the different projects and grouped them into groups of 100 million or more, and then compared to see how well various ones did against the goals that we had established. And with that, we took all that information, that analysis, as well as different inputs that we received, and we took it to our board of directors at a workshop in April and said, here are the funding categories, which I'm going to go through in just a second, the funding amounts we'd recommend, and kind of did we get it right? And that's what we did with the board. And they directed us, they said, for the most part, it is right with a couple tweaks, and we went ahead and came out and continued to pursue the framework that I'll talk about in just a second here. So just some basics on the potential sales tax measure. It's going to be proposed for a half cent over 30 years. 30 years. It'll be on the November ballot of this year if the board decides to go forward, and it's estimated to raise anywhere between 6.3. We have 6.3 billion on the screen there. We said about 6 to 6.5 billion. The thing I always joke about, the only thing I know about that number is it's wrong, because if our finance folks were quite that good, they'd be probably in Las Vegas, not here. So we're expecting about $6.3 billion in today's dollars, 2017 dollars. This just gives you an overview of the different projects, but I'm going to go ahead and go through each of these categories to give you an idea of what we're proposing and then the dollar amounts for it. So the first one, I think this is one that sounds like I'm hearing and talking to some folks ahead of time. Folks are very interested, and this would be BART Phase 2. This would be for 4 stations. It would be the second phase. Currently, VTA is building the project from Fremont through Milpitas and over to Berryessa. And what this would do is complete it through to Santa Clara, again with 4 stations. And that would be moving and be actually right out here over by the Caltrain station where it would end. This is a very exciting project because it's a brand new rail corridor. And the other thing that's that's important to note about this particular project is often we talk about bringing local dollars in through a sales tax is it does contribute to allowing us to go get additional funds through federal, regional, state sources. And this one in particular, we expect that it will help us, if we're able to secure this money, help us generate $1.5 billion in federal money and then $750 million in state money as well. So it's a very important project. It'll bring even more money in. So again, we're proposing $1.5 billion for this one to help complete the entire project. And this is just a map that gives you an idea where it is. I'll go through the maps kind of quickly because they are over here and they're a lot easier to read, I think, when you see them up close. But all the maps are along the wall over here. And then again, what we did, if you remember, is we then looked at one of the reasons we picked this is we looked at how well the different projects scored against the goals that we had. And this particular project scored well on those that you see on the screen there. So it scored very well on those goals that the board had established. The next program is the bicycle and pedestrian program, and this would be for $250 million. And this would help complete bicycle projects that are really more of a county-wide significance to, one thing we heard a lot when we were talking about bicycle projects, they said, you know, there's a lot of good bike lanes, good bike trails, but then there's a gap. And so one thing this will do is really help complete the gap in our bicycle network. Again, be for $250 million. There are some educational programs too that would also be eligible for this funding, but this would be primarily to construct new bike paths and pedestrian pathways as well throughout the valley. And this just kind of gives you an idea of the scope of what we're looking at. We really view this as being a valley-wide program that would, again, help complete the gaps. One thing we're doing, too, if folks are interested in bicycling, we're actually updating our bicycle plan right now. And what we find in that as we go through that will help also help us determine which projects will be built. There we go. So this project scored well on medium or high on the different goals that you see on the screen there. So it was another, again, a high performer. The next section is Caltrain capacity improvements. And folks are probably aware that Caltrain is going under a major project right now. They call it their modernization program, where they're instituting what's called positive train control, but probably more important, they're electrifying the system. So they're going to be getting rid of their diesel locomotives. What this will do is help it kind of take that to the next step by helping add capacity improvements once that's done, by having longer platforms, level boarding, as well as some service improvements too. One thing we're hearing a lot from the South County, Gilroy and Morgan Hill, is the need to have more service down to South County, and these funds would allow us to do that too. Again, that would be for $314 million, and that just gives you an idea where the Caltrain corridor is, and again, that's mapped over there as well. And it scored high in these categories, again, that you see, these goals that you see listed on the screen. The next section is Caltrain grade separations. This is different than Caltrain corridor improvements because what this does is actually separate the rail line from the street. So you probably know there's a lot of areas where you have to wait, the gates come down, and it can be a very dangerous situation. But what this would do would help fund Caltrain grade separations in the northern part of the county where there's a lot of congestion. It's not so much a Caltrain improvement from a transit perspective. It does certainly help if it can move faster. It doesn't have delays that sometimes are caused by this. But really, it's a safety improvement in these corridors, and also does help relieve traffic. And we would be looking at possibly having bikes and pedestrians as part of these as well, so it would improve mobility access as well. These would be the ones we'd focus on. There's a lot of unknowns with the Caltrain corridor coming up with high-speed rail coming in. So high-speed rail has an interest in doing some grade separations too, so there'd be lots of opportunities for us to partner moving forward with high-speed rail and the locals as well moving forward. So again, this one did score high in those expanding safety, enhancing safety rather than expanding transportation choices. Oops, I went too far there. The next section is county expressways, and this is for folks, this would be to make improvements throughout the county expressway system and really relieve some real key bottlenecks, some choke points that's throughout the county. The county of Santa Clara, not VTA, administers the expressway system, and they went through a very robust process where they looked at identifying what would be the most effective improvements that they could come up with. And what they did is they came up with what they called their Tier 1. These would be the highest priorities for about $750 million, and that's why we're proposing to fund it at $750 million. Again, this is hard to read, so please do take the time if you can to go over and look at it on the screen there. But it does give you an idea that these improvements are, again, throughout the county, throughout each of the expressway systems, and will help make it a more efficient and effective project. And it scored high in the goals that you see there on the screen. The next is a highway program, and similar to the expressway program, this would be for $750 million. This wouldn't be necessarily to expand, to build new freeways, but it would be to look at what are the key choke points, some key interchange or overcrossings, even some key noise mitigation areas, and looking at ways that we can have projects that would improve the highways throughout the county. So these are some that staff have identified. We put these on a candidate list. Some of these are much more ready to go than others. Some haven't been studied as much, but we would see this, again, really relieving key choke points throughout our highway system. And again, these are the goals that this one particularly scores well in. The next category is local streets and roads. And what this would be money that would be returned directly to the cities, to city government. And it would be for repair to the roadway system. One thing we hear a lot is that our streets are falling apart with potholes and other debilitating effects on our system. So this would allow the cities to go ahead and make improvements to pothole repair. One thing we would have with this is a complete street requirement too we're proposing, and as we actually would for a lot of these categories. And what that does is it would ask the city that when they're doing repair to a city, they would look at opportunities for pedestrian and bicycle improvements as well. So it's not just a roadway for automobiles, but it's going to be a multimodal road where it's possible, where it makes sense to increase bicycle and pedestrian activities. One thing about this is that some cities are doing much better than other cities in being able to maintain their roads. And for those cities that are already doing quite well, and the way it's scored is something called a pavement condition index. And if you have a 70 or above, which is a good score, they could then use it for other traffic relief as well, activities. So we'd like to give it back to the cities and have them have some flexibility, repair the roads first, make sure they're in good working condition, and then if not, if you are there, I should say, then you could use it for other transportation improvement projects. So this just gives you an idea. Again, this would be countywide, and it would be returned to the cities on a formula based on their population. And for the county of Santa Clara, which maintains a lot of roads as well, it would be based on the number of miles that they have. The State Route 85 corridor. This is folks who have traveled on 85. It's one of the most congested areas in the county. And there's been a policy advisory board that's been formed that's made up of one city representative along 85. And they've been looking at this corridor to determine what they think might be the best transportation solution for this area. And they actually just made this recommendation last week. So the board hasn't seen this yet, so we'll be presenting this to our board of directors. This comes directly from that policy advisory board. And what they're recommending we do for the $350 million that we've designated for this project is that we would create an express lane on Highway 85 in the existing HOV lane, and that would allow folks who are not carpoolers could still use it for free, but when conditions are good enough, which isn't very often because the carpool lane gets filled up pretty quickly, when that solo drivers could also hop in the HOV or the express lane and be able to use it for a fee. And what that would do is help generate revenues for that corridor. So that's one recommendation. The second is that they'd like us to have a transit-only lane for it as well. So that would allow us to get express buses through much quicker. One thing people have said, why don't you looking for transit solutions for this corridor? One of the tricky parts is that it's hard to have an express bus when nothing is moving. So better flowing traffic does help our buses quite a bit, and this would certainly help that. And then they've also asked us to have a study to investigate what a long-term solution might be, whether it be a bus rapid transit system or light rail, but do a very comprehensive study to see what it might be. And then also they've requested, as part of this, there'd be noise mitigation for 85 as well. And that's just where Highway 85 runs, for those who aren't familiar with it. Transit operations and amenities, this would be for $500 million. This would be money that would help VTA increase its transit service through a variety of different programs. Could also be with improved amenities. We've heard from many folks they'd like to see our bus stops have more lighting, more benches, more protection from the elements, etc. It could also be looked to support new service models as well, especially first, last mile. One of the tricks as transit folks is we can often help people with the longer transit, but it's that first or last mile getting them off the freeway to where they need to be. So we could use these funds for potentially that as well. And then also develop programs and services for seniors, students, the disabled, and low income as well, to have a focus on that. And that's an idea of some of our current network and how we could see ourselves, if we did have this extra funding, how we might be able to increase frequency on some core routes. We're currently doing a study of the entire system right now, so that study will help feed into what's ultimately done. So this scored high in the categories, or the goals, I'm sorry, that you see listed on the screen right there. And this is a map that kind of gives you an idea of where all the programs are that we're looking at, and you'll see again, it is throughout the entire county. So when we, as we're kind of presenting this, we're saying that we did our best as staff to take the goals that the board had come up with and then the projects that came through and match them up, and we feel we've done a good job at having that balance. We figured it's a balanced and multimodal approach. One thing when we go out to a lot of groups, we'd hear folks who'd say, you know, Measure A that we had in 2000 is transit only, it's time to have a roadway tax, or you shouldn't do anything for roads, it should be transit, or it should be bicycle. So we think we have a balanced and multimodal approach. It's geographically balanced. We try to ensure that all parts of the county would benefit. And then the leadership group has been doing polls to see, again, whether or not there'd be interest. Because one thing we've said is if there's not interest from the voters, it doesn't make sense for us to do this exercise just to have it lose. But the good news is, a lot of these categories appear to be supported by the voters. But as I say, a lot can happen between now and November, so one never knows. So the next steps that we're going to be doing with this is we've had 5 meetings in May, and this is our final one. So we really want to thank everyone for coming tonight. We'll continue to gather input that folks have. We want to answer questions, make sure folks are understanding what it is staff's proposing. Again, the polling looks strong right now. And then June 2nd is when we anticipate the board, which is this Thursday, the board has asked us to bring it back to them for consideration. And they may elect to go ahead and put it on the ballot that time. And if so, we need to get everything to the registrar by August, but essentially then it would go to a vote by the public in November. So with that, I'm going to quit, and I'd be happy to answer any questions folks have, both here and online as well. If you wouldn't mind coming up to the microphone stand. And then again, if you do want to talk to either Michelle, John, or I afterward, by all means, after the presentation, we're happy to answer questions if you want to look at the maps as well. So any questions or comments from the group? Yeah, please, if you wouldn't mind walking up, that helps because, again, we are live streaming it so the folks at home can hear you. Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for the presentation. I appreciate it greatly. On behalf of the question of sustainability, how did you guys evaluate all the different programs? I can see where you could evaluate these different options and different programs based on the amount of congestion, but how did you compare highway improvements to mass transit kind of comparison?
Sure. No, great question. Well, those 32 criteria that I mentioned set up what criteria we agreed to look at as we measured projects. So what we did is we then looked at how those projects would meet the goals that were established. So we actually didn't compare transit projects to highway projects. They're very difficult to compare, but certainly we could see a lot based on the criteria, though, it allowed us to see which ones of those goals it met. And some of them met various goals. Like, I don't think a lot of the highway projects didn't do as well in the sustainability goals, for instance. But it did do well for relieving congestion, help keeping the economy moving. So things like that, it would do better. So that's how we compared them. But we didn't want to just, again, because it's so difficult to compare the two, we just really said, here's the goals. If you want a project that meets these goals, here are the projects that do that. But it might not meet these goals. And so that's how we set it up.
Daunting challenge, so thank you very much. Thank you.
Sure, my pleasure.
So I was wondering, including existing sales taxes, what would the total sales tax going to VTA after this is passed?
That would go to VTA specifically?
Well,
is that what I'm sorry?
County sales taxes that are going to, the local sales tax going to transportation and other VTA projects.
Sure. So we have, in 1975, there was a half-cent sales tax that was for transit operations. That's in perpetuity, and that was voted on by the voters in 76. I'm sorry, not an odd year. So that goes to help transit operations. We then have the 2000 Measure A program, and that funds a variety of transit-only projects throughout. So that's a half cent as well. The other one we have is it's a quarter-cent sales tax that was approved by the voters in 2008 that is specifically for BART operations. So when the BART network comes online, that will help support the BART network.
Good evening. I have two questions.
Sure.
For all the grade separation in Caltrain, I think it is $1.6 billion, but then you give only $0.7 billion. So what happens to the streets which do not have grade separation? Would that be an impediment on the electrification of Caltrain?
Sure. So it won't be an impediment. So the electrification will happen, is happening now, regardless of grade separations. But you raise a very, very good point. And one thing we know about that quarter is the $700 million will not be enough to do all the grade separations. A lot of them haven't gone through enough planning to really have a good, strong idea what the final cost is going to be. But one thing we want to do for a number of these programs is to really work with the locals to find other funding. As I mentioned, local funding brings more funding. And so it's going to be, the one thing I can tell you is it's not going to be enough to do the grade separation. So we're going to have to be creative, working with the High-Speed Rail Authority, working with local cities, and look for other federal, state, and funding sources to maximize that dollar so we can get as many of them done as we can.
Okay. My second question is, for the dedicated lane option of the bus rapid transit on El Camino Real, I guess the board hasn't declared it dead yet. Is that right?
That's correct.
And so some of us, including me, are concerned that the new sales tax might fund that. What would you say in response?
Well, we don't have any, there's no category really for funding the bus rapid transit for that project in here. It actually is an eligible candidate in the 2000 Measure A program. So, but we are not planning on funding it through this. There's not one of the categories to do the BRT and line.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I live in Sunnyvale, and as far as I'm concerned, I think Caltrain electrification is the most important because it eases congestion as well as saves greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah, it does.
And we need better access to Caltrain stations.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
First off, excellent job up there. You're doing a great job.
Oh, thank you very much.
Kevin Moore, I'm former co-chair of the Santa Masakino-Saratoga Creek Trail. I got three quick questions.
Sure.
One, Santa Clara is known for paving the roads very well. So you were saying that, I guess, that if a project comes up, and let's say we don't have a lot of potholes, is it we can come forward, the city can come forward with the project and maybe get some of that money?
Yeah, so what we'll do with that, the local streets and roads categories, if a city does have a high PCI, and I apologize, I don't know what Santa Clara's is offhand, overall, then yeah, they could then say, or they could use a portion of it to finish their pavement, but then they could use it for other traffic relief programs. So it would be flexibility to the
San
city.
Jose, Sunnyvale, Mountain View, you're going to try to make it equal between all of them?
No. So it's because various cities have different efforts, so to say, of how they're doing it. So it would be specific for the city. So if the city of Santa Clara, for instance, has one at 70, then they could go ahead. Their pavement overall is 70. They could then use this funding that'll be returned to the cities on a formula basis, based on population. They could then use it for other.
If their number was higher and they didn't need as much, would they not get as much?
Nope, they'll still get the same amount of money. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, they'll get the same amount of money.
That's what I thought you were saying.
Yeah,
okay.
then it'll be flexible.
Second one, graffiti on the freeways and graffiti around there. Is there anything being done on that at all?
Not in this measure. Caltrans owns it. We've actually done some studies. John Sagaman, even in the back there, did a long study on not only graffiti but trash on the system as well. And it is a Caltrans issue, and so we don't have any funding going to Caltrans for this.
Last question, easy one here.
Yeah.
The Santa Masakino-Saratoga Creek Trail, it goes through where a lot of the jobs and how makes a lot of sense for alternative transportation. If your trail is in a hub that actually is used more, is that more likely to get funding, or how do the trails work?
Yeah, what we'll probably do for the bicycle program is we will create a competitive grant program. So, and from that, then depending on what the criteria is, but
Yeah.
I think that would be an excellent, those would be excellent reasons why that would score well, but we would set criteria. Again, we want to have the most effective projects as possible. So we'd set criteria, work with the communities to help them identify those, and certainly that would probably be a good candidate.
Thanks again so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks for coming.
Hey Scott, I'm
Hey,
Eugene Bradley, Silicon Valley Transit users and one of the stakeholders that Scott mentioned. Several concerns that I have. How many of you people out here remember the 2000 Measure A sales tax that passed? I was reading in one of the papers, the Mountain View Voice, that research from County Supervisor Joe Simidian revealed that nearly 80% of the tax dollars from the last two ballot measures, 2002, 2008, nearly 80% went to BART. Given what we've seen here so far with this particular ballot, this sales tax push, how can VTA guarantee that the same thing won't happen with this tax measure, where most of the money ends up going to one or two projects and everything else gets crumbs?
Sure. So the 2000 Measure A, just a couple things to remember about it too, is we started collecting revenues in 2006. So it's a 30-year tax again, so we're still in the infancy of it. The board is actually be looking at this Thursday night about advancing more projects forward as we move forward. But one thing to remember is this is a 30-year tax, and if it passes. And one thing we do want to do is, you see, we created categories, and answer your question how we will make that work is that's why we put specific dollar amounts, so you can see this is what would go to each one. And but there will be some as it goes forward. Again, 30 years, we do want to have some flexibility, but we've identified how much will go to each one. We'll also be creating a Citizens Oversight Committee as well, kind of a watchdog committee to make sure that the money is being spent the way the voters have it laid out. And again, which makes this a little different from Measure A, is we actually have dollar amounts to say this is what it would be.
Right, just a sub-question to that. How would members of the Citizens Oversight Committee be selected?
Well, we don't have those details yet. It could be similar to what we have for others, where we use our Citizen Advisory Committee, but it would be something that the board would decide, and certainly we'd welcome all public input at that point too, to determine how we could be the most effective at creating the best board.
Right. My other question is regarding, not just linking to that, just with the bus rapid transit. I understand there was a nice woman from Sunnyvale. I was also a resident of Sunnyvale, and since I used to live right on El Camino Real, one of the concerns was bus rapid transit, which I had. Originally, 2000 Measure A had included just a right turn dedicated lane. Instead, it was changed without voter approval to have full dedicated lanes. And I think that clearly right there, the staff not telling people what had changed was what really caused a lot of the opposition to BRT along El Camino Real in that area. So I wonder how VTA is addressing this to the cities and to the residents there who basically weren't told of this change.
Well, that actually, the Measure A doesn't specifically get into that level of detail. It was a study that had come out. So certainly, again, bus rapid transit is an eligible project under Measure A, but the details, how you want to do it, where you want turns to be, where you want stations, those are all the details that go through a long planning process, and that's what we do for any of these projects as well.
Right. It's interesting you bring that up because Measure A actually had the specific details for El Camino Real. I can show the entire audience if that pleases everybody.
Well, so why don't we talk after, Eugene? I'd be happy to go over it with you.
There you go. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hi, Scott. My name is Cody Kratz. I'm Administrator of Digital Communications at VTA, and I'm actually here to ask a couple of questions that came in on the live stream.
Great.
I'm trying to avoid butchering a name, so I'm just going to ask the question. How does self-driving cars fit into the equation? Will VTA Envision partake in modifying roadways for self-driving cars?
Yeah, that's a great question. It gets to, again, that this is a 30-year tax. And to be honest, I'm not sure what the impact of self-driving cars is going to be for the roadways right now. That's one thing we are looking at very carefully because, I think in many ways we're at a real key point in transportation that there's a lot of really exciting opportunities, self-driving cars, electric vehicles, really what they're doing with Uber and on-demand services as well. So we want to keep that flexibility moving forward, that maybe with the roadways, with the money going back to local streets and roads, maybe that is something we can look at if it appears that there are some infrastructure needs for self-driving cars. You know, we're kind of not there yet to know exactly what impact that's going to be, but we want to keep this flexible for 30 years. We want to be able to adapt to that.
Thank you, and definitely thank you to everyone tuning in on the live stream and for your questions. Keep them coming. Another question here from Norman Porras. Will high-speed rail be paying for any of the grade separation from their budget? And I assume we're talking about the Caltrain grade separation.
Yeah, I sure hope so. So one thing I think to get these grade separations done, high-speed rail right now is looking at doing what's called the blended system, where they're going to be running trains not quite as fast as they had originally anticipated going up the peninsula. So the grade separations aren't as important to them as they were originally. But as we look at the infrastructure of the corridor, I think we need to make sure all of our partners are together, and I think all of our funding partners together too, because again, we'd like to bring some seed money to really help get the conversation going about grade separations and really get them moving, but it's really going to take efforts from the cities as well as high-speed rail and Caltrain to really move it forward. So I don't see any of those being funded through a single source. I see those being funded through multiple sources.
So one more late arrival here. This is coming in from Twitter from a Twitter handle called A Better Bay Area, which I believe is affiliated with the Sierra Club. The question is, do the stats show VMT, which is vehicle miles traveled, and greenhouse gas driving change reductions? We can't find any numbers in the plan, so I think there's a question about maybe the metrics that are being used to measure projects.
Sure,
You want to speak to that?
Yeah, and you know, if the person wants, we could get them a lot of that information. Again, with the 32 criteria that we used, we tried to have the criteria that made the most sense for each of the projects move forward. I don't have that level of detail with us, but if anyone is interested, please see me afterward, and then the person from Twitter too, let us know, and we can send you all that information.
Hello, thanks for making yourself available tonight. My name's Gabe Fu. I'm from a group called Stand Up for Santa Clara. We've got about 3,000 members strong right now, and we just have some questions regarding sort of the Santa Clara station.
Sure, the Santa Clara BART station?
Yeah.
Sure.
So, you know, with the importance of that, our understanding is that Santa Clara would sort of be burdened with the tax and the funding of it. Is that, if it's such an important station, is there a reason why VTA can't, or the federal, get federal funds or VTA funds to fund that?
Sure. Well, it's going to be a combination of funds to get that project done. And again, so we would use some of the existing Measure A, the 1.5 local funds right there, and then we would use that to get 1.5 in federal funds, so which is a big chunk to get from the federal government, and then another $750 million from the state's cap and trade program. So it really would be, when you've got a brand new corridor like that, a brand new station, it takes multiple sources to get that done.
Right.
And again, that's not just for the Santa Clara station, but for the other 3 stations and for the railroad
Yeah,
as well.
and that was one of the points that you mentioned in your presentation, is what are the sort of milestones to kind of, you know, being qualified to get some of those federal funds?
Sure. So we're actually right now already in the it's called the New Starts program. I'm trying to bore folks too much. It's the Federal Transit Administration's, their New Starts program. And we're already in the program itself. And you actually work quite a while, years, because they walk you through. And so the good news is we're in process right now. And it's looking good, but we definitely need to bring the local money forward as well. So, you know, things can change, new administrations could change in Washington, but right now it's looking good. I'm positive.
And is part of that based on ridership, or is it, I mean, because...
Yeah, there's a number of factors they look at. I'm not an expert in it, but there's a number. Ridership is certainly important. You know, economic impact. They look at a variety of things. It's not just like an application you fill out. It's a very lengthy process.
Right. Okay. A couple other questions, if I could. The proposed site for the station, it appears that Apple may want to purchase that property. Is there a backup plan, or?
Well, so the property that we have over there is a landowner that has it. And they've decided to lease it to Apple, is my understanding. What will happen is we've been in contact with that property owner for years, knowing that this is on the books, and certainly Apple knows it's on the books as well. What would happen is if we were able to get the funding we need to continue to move this project forward, and it gets to that phase, what we would then do is determine the type of property we would need, not just there, but throughout the system. And what we do, and we do this for any project, we then negotiate with landowners to get to a purchase price. If no agreement can be done, there's a legal process that then kicks in. And VTA does have eminent domain authority, so we could get to the point where it does actually go through a judge to determine the price. So that's the process it would go through. But again, it's been on the books for quite some time. The landowner's quite aware of it.
Okay. If I could ask one more. So if there is some funding coming from Santa Clara as well as potentially federal and other sources, like you said, what are the provisions for like the citizens to be able to fund that? I mean, how does that work?
Sorry, not from the citizens
Well,
to fund it?
basically, if the project is funded by a lot of local tax-paying citizens, is it really an affordable, is it an affordable project for Santa Clara? I understand that some of the funds could come from federal, right? But
Yeah.
what's the process to kind of determine affordability?
Sure. Well, it's been a priority of VTA and the voters. So our board of directors. So I mean, we've looked at it. We originally, when we even looked at this quarter, we did what's called a major investment study where we looked at it. And then the board has decided to go years ago with the BART option. So it's like many other decisions in government, you make decisions on affordability, you make decisions on effectiveness and that sort of thing. And that decision has been made, and it's certainly a very expensive project. We've never tunneled under San Jose and part of Santa Clara before, but it also creates a brand new rail line. So those are the kinds of things that past boards have weighted, and they've gone in this direction. And so I guess, if folks still don't think it's affordable, which is certainly okay, a no vote would certainly help send that message as well. We're hoping not, but that would be, they could do it.
All right. Well, thank you very much for your time. We'll take some polls with our community and share that information with you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
My head is hurting because this is a big problem with the transportation, and I don't know how to. I'm listening to everything you're saying. I'm trying to figure out the bike trails, but how do you have them on 101?
I'm
Or
sorry.
there's bike trails on 85 and 101. Is that like?
I'm not. There are routes that go near 101.
Oh,
so
okay.
Please don't take our maps too seriously. Just to kind of give you an idea about
cool.
where things would be. Yeah.
So my son is special needs, and he uses the buses a lot. And getting east to west is a nightmare. And from Meridian and Hamilton, it takes them almost 2 hours to get here. What kind of solutions? And also, my son-in-law was taking the what is it that goes up and down El Camino, and there was a lot of people sleeping on it. It was called
22.
Hotel 22, I guess. it was.
22. Yeah.
Yeah. Have we really looked at improving east to west, more buses, and does this look at any of that?
Yeah, this particular Envision doesn't, but it's kind of working in parallel with another program VTA has right now called the TRIP program. And what we're doing is we're actually looking at our existing bus network and seeing how we can make it more effective and more efficient, and where we need to invest more funds. So that's an ongoing study. We're doing community meetings right now, and sometime next year we hope to have recommendations so we can, we only have so much money to do transit service, and we really want to look at maximizing that. I mean, we do anyway, but we last did this in 2007, so we're doing it again now to take a fresh look, to hear comments just like that. The way this relates back to Envision is that if this measure should go on the ballot, if it should be approved by the voters, the funds that were the $500 million I mentioned for transit could potentially help fund that as well. Where you say, something, if we had more money, we could run these additional routes. Or, in some cases, we won't have to run this bus every 30 minutes. We can now run it every 15 minutes or something, and that can make a big difference.
But it's sort of iffy-ish.
But, sorry?
It's a little bit iffy-ish. I mean, nothing's guaranteed. It's sort of like, this is what we're going to try to do.
Yeah.
The other thing is, speaking about Apple, and thanks for the gentleman ahead of me, we have a huge influx of people moving here from all over the world, which is great for the opportunity. I have Irish and Italian immigrants in my past, so I'm happy to have them, but I feel like a lot of these companies are building, and they're not doing their share with taking ownership, and maybe they've done a little bit, but can we put a little bit of tax on them and get them more accountable for helping our transportation issues?
Yeah, we don't have the authority to do like a business tax or anything like that. But one thing, I mean, I think you raised such a good point that one of the reasons we have so much congestion is because of the growth we're experiencing. And so what we do at VTA is for major projects as they come in, we will study them and give suggestions and I often ask for funds too to say, if we're able to do these, this would help improve transportation in the area you're building in. But we don't have land use authority, so all we can do is advise that and say, here's how you could kind of maximize these developments. Because as they go in, what we'd really like to see them is more and more be more multimodal and more opportunities where the bus wouldn't have to go across the street, but could come right in, for instance, just as an idea. So we work with them that way, but ultimately they can take our input or not.
All right, well, thank you for all your hard work.
Sure, thank you.
Betsy Magus, I'm a Santa Clara resident. Quick comment about the Caltrain grade separation, and that is simply that if you, the grade separated crossings that we already have are often bike barriers or pedestrian barriers. I'm thinking of Lafayette, for example, under Caltrain, and a couple of spots in San Jose. So as you do the grade separations, I know you are intending to, and I know that the VTA BPAC will be looking out for this, but if you do a grade separation and you don't provide bicycle and pedestrian facilities, you have the potential to either prolong a barrier or create one. And I would ask you to try very hard not to do that.
I agree with you 100%.
Hi, Mark Kelsey, Santa Clara resident. Thank you again for the presentation. It's really great to hear all the projects. One of the things I was surprised not to hear about was expansion of the light rail system, and I'm wondering why there isn't more emphasis on that. It seems like a lot of communities have really built out very extensive light rail systems. I mean, it doesn't go to our airport, and just wondered if there's what are the considerations for increasing ridership and why this not included in the plan?
Yeah, no, great question. We did look at light rail expansions, and part of it was just limited funds for how we'd have in this particular. Like I said, it's surprising how quickly 6.3 goes. We do have light rail extensions that are part of the 2000 Measure A, and that was one thing I was mentioning earlier, I think, to someone, that we're actually looking at the 2 extensions that we have on the books right now, helping get those advanced through the existing sales tax measure. So that's one reason, and actually the 3 things we're looking at moving forward are those and a people mover from the airport as well. So the 3 you hit on are going to be advanced through the existing Measure A program. So that's why we didn't focus as much on, or at all really, on light rail. But light rail is going to be a real key, is going to become even more key with the opening of the BART system as well, especially in Milpitas as it moves across and moves from Milpitas and East San Jose to Santa Clara, Sunnyvale. We have a new plan to help, a service plan that's going to provide more service through that. So light rail is still a big part of our future, but it's going to probably come from Measure A, not from this one.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great presentation. Thank you. Raj Chahal, Santa Clara resident. I have a question, following up on Nora's question, we are lacking in the arteries, like somebody coming from Morgan Hill to Santa Clara Station, it's hard for him to go from there to, say, Intel building also. Yeah. So East Coast cities have bicycle kiosks and bicycle rentals. Has VTA given a thought to that so that these last extra miles can be covered by providing those facilities by bike, although you're spending a lot of money on the bicycle paths and other stuff, are you focusing something on that part, that you can provide those bicycle kiosks all around the county so that we can cover the extra mile?
Sure. Do you mean a kiosk that would have a bike to rent in it?
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
Exactly.
No, we actually have partnered with the Air District and a couple other folks, and we do have some of those as a pilot program that we've got some money for. They're not in Santa Clara, unfortunately, right now, where the pilot was, but they're in San Jose, Mountain View, and Palo Alto. and it's called bike share, and then you can get the bike and then go. So we've been working on that pilot program, and that's certainly something that could be expanded through the bicycle program as part of this too. And part of the first last mile, because you raised such a good point, that the first last mile is often the barrier. We can get folks really close, but that last mile is the killer, where you just can't complete it. And so we're looking at shuttles or expansion of the, I mean, we're not looking specifically at that at the moment, but I think expansion of the bike share program would be something to look at. The other thing is electric bikes too. That's something we don't have on here right now, but that could even help for the little bit further, even the last 2 or 3 miles. So I think that's something to be looked at.
So do you have any results from these studies like you have done with the pilot studies at Mountain View, so that we have some feel how it's going on?
Yeah, you know, I don't have any with me, and unfortunately they're not doing as well as we had originally hoped. The usage has been lower, and there might be some reasons for that. You know, are they in the right locations? Are they, you know, in the right places? If you go to downtown, City Hall has them in front of City Hall, for instance. So that's something we're looking at, but we haven't seen as much use as we'd like to see, is my understanding. But to be honest, I haven't followed the program recently, so maybe it's doing better.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, if there aren't any further questions, I'm going to turn it back over. And want to thank everybody again. And if you do have questions, please, again, see us. We'll be down by the boards over there. So thank you very much, everyone.